Sabalenka, Eala, and the $300 million watch deal ***. Nobody warned Sabalenka. There was no meeting, no difficult conversation, no moment where someone looked her in the eye and told her things were changing. One day the renewal discussions were happening and then quietly, without ceremony, they weren't. The call she was waiting for never came. And in the world of luxury brand partnerships, that kind of silence doesn't leave room for interpretation. It is the answer. This story has very little to do with what happened on a tennis court. It has everything to do with what happened inside a boardroom, a single strategic decision made by a Swiss watch company that, depending on how you look at it, either represents the smartest long-term investment in sports marketing history or the coldest betrayal of athletic merit anyone has seen in a generation. Either way, nothing about women's sports sponsorship looks quite the same after this. To understand the full weight of what just happened, you need to understand exactly who Sabalenka is, because dismissing her makes the story smaller than it actually is. She didn't just become good at tennis. She became something the sport produces maybe once every 15 years, a player so physically imposing, so emotionally charged, so relentlessly aggressive that opponents weren't just trying to beat her tactically. They were trying to survive her psychologically. By the end of 2024, she had won back-to-back Australian Open titles and added a US Open to her collection. She was ranked number 1. She was the most dominant female tennis player on the planet, and virtually everyone in the commercial world knew it. Porsche had her, global lifestyle brands orbited her. She had built through years of ruthless consistency exactly the kind of profile that luxury companies are supposed to chase. So when renewal conversations opened with a prominent Swiss watch brand, her team walked into those discussions with quiet confidence. Not arrogance, confidence, the kind that comes from having the numbers, the titles, and the cultural footprint to back it up. They believed the deal was already done. It just needed paperwork. Then the temperature changed slowly. At first, almost imperceptibly. Emails that once came back quickly started arriving late. Conversations that had felt warm and collaborative turned measured, carefully worded, professionally distant. Anyone who has spent time in high-level commercial negotiations will tell you that shift has a recognizable texture. It's the sound a deal makes right before it dies. But nobody said anything directly. No one from the brand side sat across a table and explained what was happening. The discussion simply slowed, then stalled, then stopped. Sabalenka's team waited. The confirmation never came. And then, before they had even fully processed the silence, the news broke, not privately through their channels, but publicly, everywhere at once. The brand hadn't left tennis. They had found someone else entirely. Someone 18 years old, someone from Manila. Eala. Remember where you heard that name, because right now, the entire global commercial machinery of professional sports is learning it by heart. An era to get there. That's not a footnote. That's a historical fact. And the reaction across Southeast Asia wasn't the polite, measured appreciation you get when a talented player has a good tournament. It was something raw and louder than that. Front pages in Manila, social media in the Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia lighting up with a kind of collective pride that no advertising campaign could have manufactured on its best day. Millions of people weren't just watching a tennis match. They were watching someone who looked like them walk onto one of the biggest stages in the sport and belong there. The Swiss brand's research team had been tracking all of it methodically, quietly for months. The reported value of the deal is $300 million. And the structure matters as much as the number itself. This isn't a straightforward endorsement arrangement where a brand pays a flat fee to put an athlete's face on a campaign for a few years. Industry analysts who have examined the framework describe something significantly more complex. A multi-layered partnership potentially running 8 to 10 years with endorsement fees forming just the base. Sitting above that are co-designed product collections that incorporate Alex's creative input directly, dedicated regional campaign budgets aimed specifically at Southeast Asian markets, charitable components tied to educational programs in the Philippines, and performance bonuses calibrated to career milestones projected across the full length of the deal. What the brand built here isn't a sponsorship in any traditional sense. It's a decade-long co-investment in a human being's professional life. They aren't buying what she's already done. They're buying a seat at the table for everything still to come. The secrecy surrounding the negotiations was extraordinary, even by the standards of high-value luxury deals. Rather than going through the usual direct agent channels, which would have immediately signaled to competing brands that something significant was in motion, initial contact reportedly happened through intermediaries. Meetings took place in neutral locations. Non-disclosure agreements bound every participant, including people inside the brand's own organization. At its most restricted point, knowledge of the discussions was apparently limited to fewer than 12 executives within the company. The level of operational discipline required to keep something this significant quiet in an industry where information leaks constantly says a great deal about how seriously the brand took the decision. When it finally surfaced, first through a leak to a sports business journalist, then confirmed officially within hours, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Alex gained roughly 4 million social media followers in 48 hours across platforms. The brand's own engagement numbers reportedly hit levels their analytics team had never recorded. In the Philippines, the announcement trended nationally for 3 consecutive days. An 18-year-old from Manila had just become, in purely commercial terms, one of the most valuable athletes in the sport. Now, let's talk about the fallout because that's where things get genuinely complicated and the tennis community stops being able to agree on anything. The people closest to Sabalenka, her agents, her advisors, the professionals who had spent years building her commercial trajectory, were reportedly furious. Not quietly disappointed. Furious. And when you think about it from their position, the fury makes sense. Losing a major luxury brand renewal to another established champion would have been painful but professionally understandable. Losing it to a teenager with a handful of Grand Slam appearances, no major titles yet, and a profile that was still largely unfamiliar in Western markets, that stings in a completely different way. It doesn't just feel like a commercial decision. It feels like a statement. Sources described the atmosphere inside Sabalenka's management circle as intensely frustrated for weeks. There were apparently conversations about whether legal consultation was warranted, whether any existing contractual provisions or exclusivity clauses had been improperly handled during the non-renewal process. Nothing formal came of it, but the temperature inside that circle stayed elevated long after the initial announcement faded from headlines. The broader tennis world split along lines that weren't particularly surprising once you map them out. Veteran players, former champions, and the more established voices in sports media largely stood behind Sabalenka. Their argument deserves to be taken seriously rather than dismissed, as Southeast Asian tennis had produced technically gifted, deeply motivated athletes who built genuine followings at home while remaining almost completely invisible to the global commercial machine. Alex's contract felt to that community like proof that the geography of commercial power was finally starting to shift. Both perspectives are honest. Neither one captures everything. And through all of it, the arguments, the industry commentary, the social media battles between competing statistics and competing visions of what sports marketing should value, Alex herself was 18 years old, navigating a level of global attention that would challenge athletes twice her age and experience. That part tends to get lost in the noise. The human being at the center of the story is still a teenager who, a relatively short time ago, was just a kid from Manila with a racket and a dream big enough to take her to Spain and then to a Grand Slam main draw. Now she's a $300 million commercial proposition. The weight of that is real, regardless of how many Instagram followers come with it. Here's the thing that matters most, though, the part that gets buried beneath the personal loyalties and the online arguments. Strip all of that away and look purely at the financial logic underneath this decision, and something significant emerges about where sports marketing money is actually going in the second half of this decade. Southeast Asia is home to roughly 700 million people. Within that population, the fastest-growing consumer group is adults between 18 and 35, people with rising incomes and a well-documented interest in premium goods. Luxury consumption across the region grew throughout the early 2020s at rates that made traditional Western markets look slow by comparison, and that trajectory is projected to continue accelerating toward 2030. Tennis has been gaining real traction across several Southeast Asian countries, partly through government sporting investment and partly through the emergence of local players who transform the sport from something foreign and distant into something personal and culturally connected. When a Filipino teenager makes a Grand Slam main draw, millions of people in Manila aren't just watching tennis. They're discovering that they belong in that conversation. That psychological shift from passive viewer to emotionally invested participant is something luxury brands have spent decades and enormous budgets trying to engineer artificially. With Alex, the Swiss brand didn't manufacture it. They found it already existing and decided to stand next to it. Beyond the demographics, the deal reflects something broader happening across premium sports partnerships. A deliberate tilt toward ascending stories over established ones. Sabalenka's career is magnificent. That's not a debatable point. But her most dramatic chapters have already been written. The titles are documented. The records are in the history books. She is, commercially speaking, a known quantity. And a known quantity, however impressive, offers a brand something fundamentally different from an athlete whose journey is still visibly unfolding. For a company committing to an 8 to 10-year partnership, the ability to grow alongside someone, to be present for the moments that haven't happened yet, carries a kind of strategic value that can't be replicated by inheriting an athlete's existing legacy. The most marketable version of an athlete may not be the champion at the top. It might be the one still climbing, the one whose ceiling nobody can quite see yet. That idea is uncomfortable. It runs against how most people intuitively feel about the relationship between winning and reward, but it appears to be reshaping how the most deliberate luxury brands are choosing to invest. Aryna Sabalenka's legacy is permanent. No boardroom decision changes what she built on those courts or what she proved was possible. That belongs to her completely. But Alex Eala's story is just beginning. And one of the most precise, most calculated brands in the world just placed $300 million on the belief that a story still being written is worth more than one already finished. Whether that turns out to be visionary or a costly mistake is something only time will answer. What's certain right now is that the rules have changed. The definition of commercial value in professional sports looks different than it did a year ago. And an 18-year-old from Manila, with her best tennis still somewhere ahead of her, is at the center of all of it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was this the right call, or did the business world just make the biggest miscalculation in tennis sponsorship history? And if this kind of story is what you're here for, subscribe, because the most important things happening in professional sports almost never make the main stage. We find them anyway.